In today's video, we're going to be talking about my favorite lens for wildlife photography, the Canon RF600mm F11. Alright, first of all, I would just like to say that I do not have an official unboxing of this lens. I do have an unboxing video, but that's from Lens Rentals. So the story behind this lens is kind of crazy, and I'm just going to briefly go over it. So I rented this lens from lensrentals.com, and I like it so much I decided to buy it right from there. I got a decent, not amazing, but a pretty small discount from Lens Rentals, so I was able to justify that. I was already selling a couple of lenses that weren't my favorites, and I've now switched to pretty much all RF system. There'll be a separate video about that, but point is, I like this so much that I decided to just buy it. So that shows you how much I love this lens right here. Okay, so the first thing I want to go into is build quality, and it is pretty darn good. Now, the first thing that I will say is I do not believe that this lens is actually weather sealed. I think when it's in this form, when it's in its kind of collapsed form, I think it is completely weather sealed. There seems to be a decent amount of weather sealing around the mount, although I'm not incredibly confident about that. But I'd say the rest of the body seems pretty darn sound. I actually have a UV filter that I put on the front of mine until I'm willing to buy the $50 lens hood, which is not included. That is something to note. I believe you get a little case if you buy the lens from Canon, which I didn't, so I don't have a case, but I'm just using my old 7200 case for this lens. Other notes on build quality: it is a really nice design. I like the silver and the black influences on the design. It is not L series, so that represents kind of Canon's lower end lenses. That's in line with my 24 to 240 millimeter lens. It has similar branding, so that's pretty cool. That's just something you want to keep in mind when buying this lens. It is definitely not L series. So for build quality, it's got some nice almost leather up here on the top of the lens, which is really cool. It's nice and soft, provides some extra texture to the lens. Now, as for the actual function of this lens, you cannot use it in its closed up form. It is nice and compact in its closed up form, and I'm glad they went for an option like this. The closed up design of the lens allows for really easy transport. In fact, it's about as tall as a 7200 and just slightly more thick. And it probably weighs less too, due to its diffractive optics design. We'll get into that more later. So to actually use the lens, you have to unlock the base and then rotate and then lock again, and then you've got ready for shooting. If you try to shoot locked in, your camera will not let you. You cannot even go to your menu system. You can't even do anything without unlocking it. So there's no way you're going to miss that unless you just don't update your camera or something, which I suggest you do to get the most out of this lens. Other things for build quality: it does come with a nice amount of features on the actual body of the lens. It's got a nice control ring. It is clicked, so you can get it declicked. I believe you can go to canon.com and do that if you want to do smooth video work, but for photography, I really like the click stops, so I can just move seamless between stops. Sound basically gives me a cue of like where I'm going on the range of the stops. The focus ring is amazing. I've never really felt a focus ring that's so good. Actually, the autofocus on this lens is really good, so I don't get to use the focus ring as much as I want to. But I know when I start shooting some more landscapes on this lens, probably I will do a separate video on that. But once I start shooting some more landscapes, I will be able to use that focus ring more. Speaking of landscapes, one of the reasons I went with the 600mm over 800mm F11, number one was the size and weight. 800mm was substantially bigger, and also the filter size was 95mm, and this is 82mm, which I think is really good for landscape photographers because most people invest in 82mm filters. I have those circular filters from Polar Pro, and I'm all 82. So I can use those natively on this. If I had a 95mm filter thread, I would not be able to. So that's probably the main reason I went with this. Other things on the body: it does have a tripod collar. Unfortunately, it does not rotate. That's kind of a setback for me. So if I ever want to do vertical shooting, I'm going to have to attach my L bracket, which might look a little weird. So that's actually probably the biggest negative of this, but it is a solid tripod socket. I trust that nothing will fall off of that. It seems pretty darn stable, and you may not even need it depending on how robust your camera is. If you have maybe the new R5 or R6, you should be good because of the weight displacement, because this really is a light lens, and that's really a pro. It's lighter than a 7200 F4, which is amazing. I don't know how they did it, and it still performs great. There are some switches on the side. You've got a 12 millimeters to infinity switch if you don't want to focus on things that are close, if you're trying to shoot a faraway bird or an animal or something. But of course you can set that to full as well. You've got your standard AF/MF switch. You also got your stabilizer button. So those are the three switches. It has great build quality, great switches, a little bit of a negative on the tripod collar, but still overwhelmingly good. Great control ring. I love being able to use that for wildlife. It's saved me on a lot of shots. So that's pretty much concludes it for build quality. Now let's go into the performance of this lens. I will say I'm amazed by it. Now, people may be scared that it's an F11 aperture, and you have every right to be scared. I'll tell you, I was scared. That's why I rented the lens before buying it. I just had to try it. So I shoot on the Canon EOS RP, which is the lowest quality RF camera, and I get amazing results, even in high ISOs. I mean, I get usable results way up to... I got an amazing shot that I printed on my wall. I shot at ISO 10,000 in a dark forest. The F11 aperture is not as much as a limitation as you think. You can still get amazingly usable shots. You don't even need denoise AI software like that Topaz denoise AI. I was considering investing in that, but Lightroom has good enough tools that I don't need it. And these full-frame RF cameras, they really handle high ISOs well, and your ISO will get up there. I have not really used ISO 100 for situations besides maybe landscapes with this lens. You will never use it, but if you know your settings, you will be able to get around that fact. If you know your settings, you will not have any trouble with low light. So I had to make sure that I found the right shutter speed for those birds. Do not be afraid to get your shutter speed low if you're shooting an animal that doesn't move a lot, like a deer or a songbird that's just sitting on a branch. I shoot around maybe 1/250th of a second, and with the amazing image stabilization, I'm able to get sharp shots. In fact, in some scenarios, I'm even able to get sharp shots at 1/100th of a second. Image stabilizer at 600 millimeters, handheld. That is amazing. That stabilizer basically makes the lens like an unstabilized f8 lens, I would say, because of the compensation you're getting from that extra stabilization. It allows you to keep that high ISO low. Now, I will admit that you will get a ton of noise if you're shooting birds in flight. I would only suggest shooting birds in flight on this lens in broad daylight. At night, it will be really rough. But for non-moving birds or slow-moving birds or any kind of other animal, I think it's totally great to shoot this lens at any time of the day. Don't let the F11 scare you. If you're a good photographer, you will make this lens work. Like I said, the image stabilizer is great. You can have your control ring, quickly change your ISO, and get the shots. The autofocus also is insane. Pretty much instant. It knows exactly where to go. Razor sharp autofocus. You'll never miss a shot based on the failure of the autofocus system. If you're going to miss a shot, it's going to be because of you're using too low of an aperture or your ISO is so high that your image is unsharp. So you don't even have to worry about the autofocus. The sharpness of this lens is off the charts. I crop a ton on this lens, and I've got a 26 megapixel sensor, and I'm never disappointed with the resolution. I usually do 1-to-1 crops, especially if I'm just posting on Instagram, and I get amazing results. You have nothing to worry about with the sharpness. And since it's a diffractive optics lens, you will not get as much chromatic aberration and flaring, which is great. Another thing to note, though, is that you cannot stop down your aperture. Now, this isn't a problem for wildlife, because obviously you don't want to go lower than f11. But for landscapes, you cannot get that f22 look. So you will just have to keep that in mind. Your landscapes will not have everything in focus at 600 millimeters. So just something to keep in mind. But by having that aperture fixed, it really just simplifies what you do. I usually set my shutter speed based on the animal, and then I just have my F11 locked in, and then I just use the control ring to adjust the ISO, and that's worked great for me. I can't really think of any negatives of the performance of this lens besides the F11. Obviously, in a perfect world, I would have liked an F8 or maybe an F5.6, but this kept the price down of this lens to $700, which is really the best part about this lens, and it really allows wildlife to become less than a expensive hobbyist or pro division. Now anyone can shoot wildlife. When you're at 600 millimeters, you'll still always get some level of separation with this lens. However, it won't be as much as a 6.3, 5.6 lens, so you do have to keep that in mind. For most scenes, if the background is far away from the animal, it looks just like you would with a $10,000 wildlife lens. But when scenes are closer to the bird, you do get a little bit less separation. There are things you can do. You could do a slight Gaussian blur in Photoshop. You could do things to fix that. But obviously, you are getting some trade-offs, but I think, for me at least, that outweighs what I want to do with my nature photography. Okay, so I've talked a big game about this lens. So let me show you my favorite photos. I've tested it in many different conditions. Let's look at the different conditions and some of the different photos I captured with this lens. So let's look at some of the first images I took with this lens. Right away, I was astounded by the sharpness. Look at this pigeon here. Obviously, it's not a great composition, but this was literally the first picture I took. Great sharpness, minimal noise. This is where you do see the lack of subject separation. This is another one of the first photos I took. You get amazing background separation. There's nothing to complain about here. It focused right on this tufted titmouse and really got a great shot. There's another one of a cardinal. As you can see, great separation, great colors, minimal noise. Obviously, I did apply some noise reduction, but it's still pretty darn good. Here's some more. There's a squirrel photo. This is a photo I took at 600 millimeters, and you really get some nice images. You can really point at any kind of plant, and you'll get these kind of artistic images like this. Here's a photo of an owl I got. Now, this photo is out of focus, but that was my fault. I was using way too low of a shutter speed because I was in a really dark forest. So this is where the lens can underperform. Like I said, you can still compensate for the dark forest, but I was new to this lens. In this scenario, I didn't really know how to do that very well. It was somewhat backlit and in the dark forest, and it was a really quick moment, and I missed it, which I regret, but I actually ended up getting a shot later on. Here's a chickadee shot, really nice clarity. This was the one I really wanted to highlight here. This was like almost nighttime, and this was in dark shadow. The background was really bright, and I was able to capture this amazing chickadee, really sharp, and it's printed on my wall now. Beautiful separation, everything, and high. I think this was at ISO 10,000, but it still is an amazing photo. Here's another one. Just great quality. I just love the images it produces. It's hard not to get a good image. Here is when this lens really shines, when you're shooting these slow-moving animals. I could really get my ISO down here and get right up close to this deer. You can see every detail in its fur, every detail in its ears, everything. I'm so excited about this lens because I've never really been able to shoot wildlife before, and this just really opened my eyes up to that. Here is a barred owl, and that's probably that same owl I captured earlier, but I was able to nail focus even though it was a backlit condition. My camera still performed well enough. This amazing backlit shot of the owl. Here's another one. Like I said, I wasn't quite as close to this bird, but the 600 millimeters still allowed me to reach out and get this beautiful shot with the beautiful foliage and it's so sharp. You can really just zoom in and there's a composition right there, like that. There you go. That's how sharp this lens is. Even at 26 megapixels, it produces amazing results. Here's actually the first landscape I did on this lens. Now, I do plan to do a separate video on landscapes, but as you can see, it can produce some really interesting images, and obviously not everything will be in focus, but you can still get some good results. So, in conclusion, this lens has really changed the course of my photography for the better. Obviously, I'm not quitting landscape photography, but this really allows me to fulfill the role of nature photographer. I've always loved birds just as much as I love landscapes, and this lens really gave me the ability to do that. It has an excellent sharpness, excellent autofocus, excellent handling, great image quality with some drawbacks, but if you're a good photographer, you can produce great results. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really put a lot into these reviews, so it would be really helpful if you liked and subscribed. Also, make sure to check out my podcast with two photographer friends, the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.